Seeing images of glory in my mind at enlistment. Overhead a flapping red, white, and blue filling the distance. A grand divide between myself and conscientious convictions or belief systems that stop people from killing over religion. I was young and I was out of options in my mind. It was supposed to be fun, my obligations ill-defined. I didn't want to take charge with a gun back in my mind. Without college or riches, no dreams to realize. Well, I never have the ladder of the Marines to get me to first. Ain't nothing better than dress blues and the one spitting this verse. To see the world hand to the GI Bill, fat in the purse. My recruiter made it sound simple, a play get well rehearsed. Forever cursed to the ones who get young innocent signatures under the guise of a God country that honor diminishes. Greed built a standing army when against the founders' wishes. Now free democracy conducts war games and peacekeeping missions. Ironic hypocrisy.
Falling tears, raindrops from your eyes. Falling rain, let it fall.
I scored high in my entrance exams on ASVAB and chose the 0341 with guaranteed Hawaii track. Graduated basic, now MOS school's where I'm at. I'm more than a man with a 35-pound gun on my back. Plus my rifle 8 pounds and 65-pound pack. I'm 18, weigh a buck 95 and feel jack 180.
Okay.
Good afternoon to everyone out there. Thank you for joining us for another Stand Down Live, where we, have conversations that, quite honestly, range from tip to tail. And in this moment of, national and global righteous, uprising for liberation and justice, for, marginalized people, particularly Black, this summer after the killing of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, whose names we, lift up. And it's really where this live webinar was really born out of, was the need to have a conversation. And so today's is, going to get deep. And so I understand after all these months and just heartbreak and just, I really just want to start out the conversation by, offering like a trigger warning, because the conversation today does and will cover, descriptive and violent behavior that resulted in the end of life. And so today we are here. And so I just want to pause there and say, like, if you want to, pause, maybe just share this live, if this isn't the moment to watch this, it'll be here live. And when you can take this in, the live will be here. The reason that we feel compelled to have this conversation is because this conversation or these issues aren't new. The experience of Black folks and veterans who have experienced violence and, the systems failing them in a way is really why we're here today, and really excited for our conversation that, will advocate for justice for U.S. Army veteran and combat medic, Gregory Edwards. And so one of, the moments, one of the things that I think that we've been talking about here is that, veterans aren't monolithic, their experiences aren't monolithic, but there are some themes in terms of, you serve your country, you do it honorably, you deploy and you take these orders and you come back home and there's an expectation that you will be safe because you've done those things, that there are systems in a healthcare, the VA, that should be accessible to you when you need it. And so today's conversation is going to talk about, the systems of policing and how the approach, there are process gaps in terms of the approach and how veterans who need help and support are oftentimes failed when those interactions are replaced with police, just police interactions. So I want to thank everyone for being here. Share this conversation, share the live. I think we have a call to action after a really dynamic conversation. So usually we go for an hour. Today we are going to, we feel compelled really to have a show which will be a little lengthy at an hour and a half because we have dynamic guests and activists and people who knew Gregory and who are going to really tell his story and talk about the man, the father, the husband, the friend, and the neighbor who people could count on. So really we want to, just say, open up your chest. If your experience isn't that of a directly impacted person, this is a day for you to really listen and learn. And then by the end of the show, we'll have an all hands on deck approach for everyone to be able to do something to stand in this moment for directly impacted people. Again, specifically, today we're talking about a Black man who should be here today to celebrate, another day of life and the upcoming holidays with his family. So thank you for being here. I'm excited for the show. Miles, Mike, another great show hosting with you all. I'm so excited to get to the guests, really because I really want people to hear from them, because really we could just stay on mute today. I want to hear from y'all before we do. How you feeling, and open us up with some thoughts.
Natasha, you said all the right things. I probably won't say anything today. The video, you gave the trigger warning, you gave space, you gave grace, you gave compassion, you exemplified peace. Like, this is an ongoing struggle. Even talking about it, beginning to share is makes me sick. So I've had experiences. I have not suffered extreme violence, which I will echo. There's extreme violence to be discussed today. And I have not suffered extreme violence at the hands of the police, but I've suffered many an unjust arrest because of an unjust search. So with that being said, I'm going to save what I have to say, because I only have to speak if I see something not being answered that I really need answered, because this is an ongoing conversation and we need to stop. We need to move. We need to all have this conversation. This chat room at 45 needs to be at 450. It needs to be at 4,500, 45,000. Like, this needs to be everybody's conversation. So I'm happy to see the little things that are happening in society, but we don't need window dressing. And so with that, let's move on. And I want to hear from everybody else. Peace. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Mike. I love y'all.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, I'm here operating in the background and making sure the stream goes live. So just happy to be here and talk about Gregory Lloyd Edwards and his unjust death at the hands of the enemy police force here in the United States. So let's, Natasha, go ahead and get it going, please.
Yes. Okay. And so, I really just want to get into it. We have, like I said, a dynamic and full hour and a half. We'll have a moment where we'll kind of pause and just kind of reflect on Gregory. We want this conversation to be much more than the hashtags that you'll see shared. Gregory was a full person who was loved by many, respected by many, and because of his service to, to this country, we really just, wrap our arms around his family and the people who are coming on today to speak to us, but particularly his wife, who is an Air Force veteran, combat veteran, who, herself has taken orders abroad and has, also returned home with combat stress and PTS. And so when we think about just that alone, and the grief that she has, just out there. So we really want to wrap our arms around her, and those that are close to the family, who are not in this space today, but we are taking up this opportunity to advocate for you and the memory of Gregory. And so we'll get into the conversation and starting off here in just a moment with Dana, who's going to come on screen and really just, given a timeline of, of the events that happened in December 2018, when Gregory should have gotten, health care, but instead police response. And so, Dana, I am really excited for you to be on with us today. And really the floor is yours.
Thanks for having me. This journey of this incident has been going on for so long, and it's been the struggle. It's been the struggle for the Edwards family. And I would like to start off with a piece of a press brief that I did a while ago, just to kind of set the tone. So I'm going to be looking down at my paper. George Washington once said, "The willingness with which our young people are likely to serve in any war, no matter how justified, shall be directly proportional to how they perceive the veterans of earlier wars were treated and appreciated by their nation." With the release of the Corrections Center surveillance tape in the case of Gregory Edwards, George Washington would be crying today. He'd be crying because Gregory Edwards was precisely the kind of soldier he would have recruited. Greg was a combat medic who served in Kosovo and Iraq. Now, combat medic doesn't have the macho undertone of a sniper or special ops, but make no mistake, it is one of the toughest jobs a soldier can have. Medics on the battlefield must render aid to those injured, and in doing so, they expose themselves to attack. In movies, you hear the term head on a swivel. A medic can't do that when he or she is trying to render aid. Their entire focus is on their patient. So imagine, if you will, being in the middle of a battlefield with injured and dead soldiers all around you and not being allowed to look around to see where the bullets are coming from. But you are so armed and responsible under rules of engagement to fire on hostiles when you see them. And when he saw soldiers falling back and running from fire, his job was to run into fire. As a consequence of this double duty role, combat medics often face stressors that only military specialties do not. Military medics are at high risk for burnout, compassion fatigue, combat stress, and medic PTSD. And after all that, he came home to be the loving and caring son, father, husband he was before he deployed. But he brought home with him the demons one can only acquire from war. Greg suffered from PTSD, and on the day he died, he needed help. That same help he rendered when he was a combat medic. He needed someone to stop looking around for threats and to see him and to see his need. And all the love in his heart wasn't enough to drown out the damage he brought home with him. He struggled, and most days he prevailed. Waking up with PTSD every day was a silent expression of bravery that the deputies who caused his death never saw. They didn't see a veteran with PTSD, despite the fact they were told that's what he has. All they saw was a suspect to subdue with force. I wanted to open that up because I also was a combat medic. Even though I did not deploy as a combat medic in my 25 years, I did deploy as a respiratory therapist, and I took care of those that were wounded. On December 9th, Gregory Edwards and Kathleen Edwards and their little daughter went off to Walmart around 11 a.m. She didn't want to leave him at home. He hadn't been able to sleep. He had some psychosis going on, and she was afraid that he could possibly commit suicide. So she took him to Walmart to go get some sleeping medicine, what have you. They were walking into the Walmart, and Greg ended up taking a detour into a charity truck. And in that charity truck, for some reason, he felt like he needed to lay down. And then that's when the charity worker decided to ask him to leave. And then there was a tussle. All of that said, West Melbourne Police was called. And with the help of the charity worker or another standby person, they actually subdued Greg. The police officer did get his mental health information, his veterans information, his medication. So they knew that he was suffering from a PTSD episode. Holly, in videos, as you can see, told them he's suffering from PTSD. And I have to point out that she was relieved that the police were going to take him into custody, because she knew he was going to get help. The Melbourne Police did the paperwork for the Baker Act, which, for those that don't understand what Baker Act is, Florida law that allows for the involuntary temporary detention and examination and treatment of people who are impaired by a mental illness. And he's been Baker Acted before, so she just thought that he would be getting the help that he needed. And in this case, he did not. So he was taken to the Brevard County Sheriff's Office. And I'm going to give you a little timeline just so you can see. So at Walmart, it was around 11 a.m. By 1:19, he had a confrontation with the deputies. And that's when, once they got out of the cell, he was being walked to the booking area, and there was a confrontation with him and a deputy. He was taken down, and then that's when they tased him, beat him, maced him, and it took, the reports say, 7 deputies. But when you see the video, you can actually see that there were probably 7 to 10 deputies that were on him at any given time. So that was at 1:19. Now, mind you, they did not perform any type of medical care once they tased him, once they beat him, once they maced him, and once they put him in the restraint chair. There's supposed to be some medical checks. By 1:57, he was in cell 9. He was in cell 9. And you know what? I'm looking at that right now, and how ironic that is. December 9th, cell 9. That just came to me. But he was not physically checked while he was in cell 9. They would do what I call a peep show. It just looked like there were just people peeping in with no regard to human life, like a freak show or something. 2:23, someone identified that maybe he's not doing too well, because no one walked into that room until that time. They removed the spit hood. They did a sternal rub because he was unresponsive. And everyone took their time. It seems like they were laid up along the wall, and nobody had any emergency to walk fast, to move fast, to yell at somebody to go get help. It was non-emergent to them. And at the same time, this is when they started to remove the taser, removing the taser probes. So they never removed the taser probes prior to going into the restraint chair. 2:26, the nurse finally is able to bring in oxygen. She's waiting at the door while they're removing the taser probes and comes in and puts oxygen on them. And it ended up being about 15 minutes from the time from he was in cell 9, whatever they decided they needed to do in cell 9, to the time that they got to the medical unit. It was almost 15 minutes where he was not given CPR. 2:38, once they got to the medical unit, the nurse there, which is a different nurse, she called for CPR and for 911 to be called. And the deputy that called 911 was totally confused, did not really have the facts, didn't know who was hurt. It was just oblivious that he didn't know what was going on. Of course, his supervisor didn't give him all the information that was needed. 3:05, I didn't put in here when the ambulance arrived, but at 3:05, the ambulance departed from the jail. And at 3:45, he arrived at the hospital, the Rockledge Regional Medical Center. So from that point on, from 11 a.m. to 3:45, not one phone call to Mrs. Edwards at all. None. It wasn't until around 9 p.m. is when the first deputy called her home and told her that she needed to get to the hospital. 9 p.m. 3:45 to 9 p.m. There was no phone call to say, Mrs. Edwards, you really need to get to the hospital right now. Not until 9 o'clock. Where was the deputies, the sheriff's department's compassion to notify a family member that their family member is dying in a bed? I just don't understand. And then at 10:38, agents showed up to her house and they wanted to ask a bunch of questions, medical questions. So she thought it was normal because I guess it's happened before. But then that's when they tell her she needed to get to the hospital. So, and he died December 10th on around 8 p.m. The medical examiner said it was the cause of death was excited delirium and complications and ruled it an accident. I don't believe it was an accident. There is just too much there that they failed to do in the jail cell. Why he was there, they could have provided medical care. They left the spit hood on his face with the mace, and he could have been drowning in his own mucus. That pepper spray just kept it going and agitated it even more. And you can see in the video, if you watch the Florida Today video, just watch it from beginning to end, and you draw your own conclusion on whether this was justified. So I didn't put it out in the beginning, but I am a neighbor of Holly Edwards, Kathleen Edwards. We began to be friends. We knew of each other in 2000 and early 2017. We were just beginning our relationship. Greg and my husband had gone fishing. He'll be on in a little bit, but so we really didn't know each other. But my husband called me and said, hey, something happened to Greg, and he was out of town. And so he said, I need you to get up to the hospital. And that's when I went to the hospital. And I was there when Greg passed away. But it's not about who your friends are in a sense. And I say that only because we didn't know each other that much, but we were veterans. And that's why I do what I do, is to help those in need. And at that moment, she needed someone to help her on the veteran side to move things along for her. So I really appreciate Kathleen, if you're listening, or that I appreciate that you had enough confidence in me and you trusted me to help you with the passing of your husband, and to help you from now. And now our friendship is stronger. So I've been able to help her since then. So I really appreciate you having me on the show this evening. And everyone out there that has been advocating for releasing the video, and out there on Wednesday nights, and Jacinda's out there, and Lauren's out there, and there's so many civilian people, folks out there that have been out there on the roads and protesting and getting these signs out there and letting the Brevard County Sheriff's Office know that we don't agree what has happened here in Brevard County, and that it should never happen to any veteran again and no other Brevardian again. And that mental health illness is something that we really need to advocate for. And you go to a mental health facility instead of jail first. So I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. I really appreciate your words, and just really, just thank you for being on with us, and sharing the I dare say it timeline, but to just really set some context of the interaction, and again, like what led to the interaction with Brevard County. So I want to keep us kind of going. I know we have a lot of time in the agenda for us to have like conversation and questions. So I'm looking forward to that. So up next is Denise, who is a friend of both Gregory and Kathleen, his wife, and is also a military veteran, and so is on with us today to share your personal story and experience, and then really also share and take up space around, how, your story in terms of advocating for Gregory. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me on the show today. Like you said, I've known Kathleen Edwards since 2006. We were both in Iraq. That was my battle buddy. Basically, we kept each other sane and alive for the most part during our tour in Iraq. It was hard to find out of Greg's passing and the way he went, being that I am also a combat veteran and I also suffer from PTSD. I feel that sometimes they look at us on the outside and they say we look fine and everything's okay, as they prejudged Greg that day that they took him into custody. But what all looks fine on the outside might not be fine on the inside. It's hard knowing that you fight for this country and you put your life on the line and you don't know if you're going to return home, but you do know that going into it, and you still give it your all, and you are putting your life on the line for the country to turn around and come back to the United States of America and be treated less of a human. Greg was an amazing father. He was an amazing husband. Kathleen was so happy with Greg. I've never seen her like this excited. Like I said, I've known her since 2006. So we've had very tight communications. And in my whole time of knowing her, the just joy that Gregory brought to her life was amazing. I was so excited for her to find her soulmate. They were expecting a child at the time that this incident happened. Was due no later than a week after his incident. That was tough because she had to not only go through losing her husband, her soulmate, the father to her child, but bringing in a new life without her soulmate and her partner, and her also go to during her times that she would need somebody during her times of feeling low and dealing with her post-traumatic stress disorder. Greg will do anything. If you knew him as a person, he would do anything for you. If he came into your area of town where you lived, he would just go out his way to make sure that he stopped by at least for 30 minutes so he could just see you and chop it up and make sure that you were okay. He was that type of person. He was a check-in type person to make sure that you were okay and how are you doing and how have you been. He was also very active in a local community where they lived. So he was a very, like, a shining star. His personality was just amazing. So it's a shame because as a combat veteran, you know, I don't fear having episodes in public, but I do fear the treatment that I will receive if I have an episode in public. Obviously, there's nothing that you can do to control your episodes and when they're going to happen. Yeah, there's things and techniques that you can use, but you never know when you are going to have an episode. But it's a shame that you cannot know that you would have an episode and know that the local police will take care of you and the local police will have your back and they won't be the ones that you die with. With the mental health aspect, police officers should not pull that role. If they get informed that the person is having a PTSD episode, at that point, they should have somebody, psychiatric doctor or somebody that has dealt with veterans with PTSD, that understand what we go through, understand what we might be seeing within our minds, because what you might see is not what we might see in our heads. You know, you might just see us freaking out, but we might be flashing back to Iraq or Afghanistan, or maybe in Gregory's situation, Kosovo or Iraq. You just never know what is going on the inside, and the outside doesn't really reflect it. So it's very important to get the psychiatric backing for the veterans that suffer from PTSD and manic episodes and everything, and maybe we can save more lives in the future. Unfortunately, we lost a great life at the hands of the police officers, and it's a shame because had they just sent him to a ward, psychiatric ward, instead of sending him to jail, he would probably be alive today, most likely, because they would know and understand how to treat him instead of beating him and tasing him. So it's just hard. It's a hard pill to swallow. It's hard for me right now to talk about it without breaking down, because he was an amazing person and he did suffer and he tried. And every year around this time, he suffered. He suffered every year. This wasn't something new. This wasn't something that just happened. This was something that he was fighting with, and they felt him as a whole. So I'm so sorry to watch my friend suffer and have to raise her kids without him, and knowing how much she loved him, and knowing as a combat vet myself, it just is a shame, because I'd rather, like, when I went to Brevard County to help her and lay him to rest, I was so stressed out and so scared just being over there, because I know what happened. And I shouldn't feel that way. I felt so uneasy. You know, it was just hard for me. And I didn't feel like that in Iraq, where I was getting bombed. I didn't feel that way in Afghanistan, where my life was literally on the line every day. I opened my eyes and every day I went to sleep. But to be in a county and know that Kathleen and Gregory have fought for this country and can't even drive my car down the street and feel at peace and ease, is hard. It's hard. So I just feel like they need to do better in caring for the veterans that suffer from PTSD episodes, and instead of sending them to jail, they need to put them with a psychiatric doctor that can help keep them safe. And that's all that I have.
Thank you so much, Denise. I know that this was hard, but your voice and you sharing Gregory's story is powerful. Thank you. Miles, Mike, you.
I am so thankful for this space today. I'm so thankful we have this platform to share, that this message can be heard, that This deputy, the sheriff needs to certainly be fired and arrested, and all the deputies and sheriffs involved need to be arrested in the murder of Gregory Edwards. I'm happy we have this space to share and the freedom to speak freely. I'm in tears like just the whole time. So there you go. She's so powerful. This is so beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, Mike, go ahead.
No, let's just keep it moving.
Okay.
Go on to the next
I
one.
appreciate you like just recognizing the space. And I think it's okay for us to take a brief moment because we're sharing, deeply personal, I don't know a veteran who doesn't fear interactions. And I want to be specific when I say veterans that look like me are terrified of these interactions. And so while we're here and we're advocating for justice for Gregory, we are also, I heard Denise say that the call to action here is to prevent this from happening to anyone else. And so I just really want us to, I know we have 2 more speakers lined up. So I just kind of want us to, we're on pace and we're on, we're good on time.
Okay. No, I don't. See, the thing is, I feel like I don't want to take up any space. But I can tell that I'm being told to take up some space. Like, I am so blessed. I'm so blessed to have this space, to have this breath, to have a place to speak the things that I believe are so radically different than mainstream America. But they're so in line with what everybody believes, because everybody I meet loves me. I feel like the fear that I have like constantly learned to overcome when I'm driving my boys to school, when I'm out with my family, to appear normal, at times makes me lose my fucking mind. Because I'm literally 2 people, at least. I'm my private, jovial, easygoing, happy, loving self. And then when I'm out with my family, when I'm out in public, I'm very guarded. When I'm out doing shows, I'll let it be known, like, when I'm out in public, I'm guarded because I know this country will take that flag behind me and wrap it around my neck and string me from a tree if they get the fucking chance. Like, so to be able to speak the way I speak and share my truth fearlessly week after week and year after year and album after album has me feeling like this is not my place. And that's foul, because I did go willingly into the Marine Corps and choose to fight. I was blessed not to go to combat, right? But choose to go and give my body for what I thought was the right thing. And to come home and go through multiple arrests because of illegal searches, because of who I am, because of how I appear, and for minor possession to go to jail for a weekend or for a night or for 2 nights. At any moment I could have gone off and tripped and not be here today. And it's not like I played the good role, but I'm fortunate. I'm one of the fortunate ones. You know what I'm saying? One of the fortunate ones. Like, you see a successful Black man in this country, and they're an athlete, or they're an entertainer, you know, very recently, businessman, politician. Like, it's not normal. It's not normal. So we are constantly triggered, you know, like, it's in our DNA to be triggered, you know. I don't want to perform, you know. I don't want to perform. I want to give up the space. I want to give up the space and hear the story, and let the story of Gregory Edwards be heard. Let the life of Gregory Edwards be heard. Let the name of Gregory Edwards be heard.
Thank you, Miles.
Yeah.
Thank you, Miles, for sharing your personal story and just being vulnerable. I appreciate you. Up next, we have Brent, who, just having an introductory conversation with Brent. I was just given the context, and being in Brevard County, and knowing Gregory as a neighbor and as a man. Brent, I'm really happy to have you on, and really, without delay, the floor is yours.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. Like my wife said earlier, I knew Greg before my wife met the family. And we were just building a home, and he would always ride by. And finally, Kathleen stopped by and said, yeah, we've been planning on stopping by. So that's how I met him in early 2017. And, he would always swing by the house with his daughter in tow in the little buggy that you attach to the bicycle. We managed to go. Gregory was a big fisherman. And unfortunately, him and I got to do one trip together, and the joy that was for the both of us to go out, catch some kingfish in the Atlantic Ocean. And, it was just remarkable, and we planned on doing multiple trips after that. And, fast forward till probably a week before the incident, the town that we live in was having a Christmas tree lighting. So I was there, my wife was there, Greg and Kathleen, and their, I think their daughter was, I don't know, probably 3 years old, 4 years old, something like that at the time. And so we talked, and we had, we planned on going fishing when I got back. Unfortunately, I flew out of town to go to New Orleans to visit my family and north of Baton Rouge. And that Sunday morning when I'm coming back, Kathleen's neighbor was texting me. I didn't know it was Kathleen's neighbor, but this unknown number was showing up. I said, spam. Didn't bother with it. So right before we were getting ready to board, I decided, I'm gonna answer this phone call. I answered the phone call. Well, I called the number, shall I say. And it was the neighbor. Hey, man, I've been trying to catch up with you. Hey, I need you to hurry up to the hospital. I say, man, what's going on? I say, man, it doesn't look good. Greg's in the hospital and he's in bad shape. I said, man, what happened? He didn't really go into what happened. So I called my wife, who was here, and I said, hey, look, I'm getting ready to board the flight, but I understand that Greg's at the hospital. And I need you to get over there and find out what you can. Reach out to this guy. I gave the number, and he provided the necessary information for her to get to the hospital before Greg, succumbed to his injuries. And I was just getting on the flight. We were getting ready to take off when I was able to take the call before, I had to shut go on airplane mode. And that was a sad moment, on that hour-and-a-half flight was a very sad moment. And when I got to the airport in Orlando, my wife called me. She said, hey, I need you to hang around the airport because Greg's family is coming in. Now, keep in mind, Kathleen, I'm assuming, had called them and said, hey, Greg has had an episode and he's been, he's in police custody. But they had no idea they were coming to say their last words to Gregory Edwards. And when you think about that, it's just in this country, that's just unheard of. Now, I really didn't, it took me a while, and I still haven't watched the entire video. But because for what happened, Gregory should still be alive, and I can only, if you've ever put a spit hood over your head, if you've ever been maced or gone through the gas chamber, you understand that you're losing fluids from your eyes, your nose, and a spit hood is not like it's not a very porous material. So you think about you having a spit hood on your head, you got fluids, you're crying, your eyes are welling, you got mucus running from your nose, and you've got saliva coming from your mouth. And if that's not a very porous material, then it becomes it's already hard enough to breathe in it. When you got all those other things going on, it becomes virtually impossible to breathe in it because now you basically, with all that going on, with all your bodily fluids going into those openings, now it's basically impossible to breathe out of it. So I wanted to see when he was in that restraint chair, what his motions were, and you can tell by looking at that video when he was in that room by himself, virtually dying. He was stressed. He was in distress, and to not be able to acknowledge that, and you're supposed to be a trained professional. It just, to me, it's criminal. And you think about it too. If you've ever been tased before, it's sort of like having fish hooks. It's sort of like a fish hook type experience. And you think about he's in that chair. He's got these tasers in his back. He's strapped to that chair. If you've ever been hooked by a hook, you can imagine the kind of pain that must have been for that young man. And then trying to grasp for air at the same time. It's hard for me to talk about because we did get along. I understood how to talk to him. We always had good times together. Um, he was anxious. Gregory was anxious. He was anxious because within a week prior to Christmas, he was expecting a new baby boy, and that's why he wasn't sleeping, because he was anxious. The baby was going to be delivered at home, and he was just overwhelmed. Hadn't slept, and he was just excited. And I did watch the sheriff's narrative of what took place, and that's exactly what it was. A narrative. He was turning around and he was trying to reach a certain audience. You know what? Fortunately for us, though, Florida Today and Jessica, the attorney in that case, were able to get us the video. And we know from start to finish how Gregory Edwards' day began in sheriff's custody and how it ended in sheriff's custody. And I want to say this, I personally believe that's the first time that I've ever seen an American soldier tortured by law enforcement officials. Because you think about it, when he's sitting in that cell, gasping for air, because that spit hood is clogged up with his bodily fluids. He's got those fish hooks he's got those tasers in his back. And you can see it, and you can look at that video, you can see him squirming in that chair. And I just wish there was audio, but to know that these are supposed to be professionals that sat and watched that young man basically succumb for no reason except someone wanted to turn around. That I'm going to assume, this is my assumption, because he got into an altercation. It was an altercation, but that altercation shouldn't have caused him his death. So I think what we need to do from this point on, I'm a member, I'm a paid for life American Legion member. I think what we need to do from here on out, and what I'm going to do, is go to each one of these halls, the VFW, the American Legion, and I'm going to ask them to watch that video. We need to have a watch party. I'm going to see if they'll do a watch party at each one of these veterans halls. Either you're for a veteran or you're not. But it's all about humanity. In those last hours of Gregory Edwards' life, he was not treated humanely. Point blank. But I'm going to make it a point of mine to go to each one of these, the American Legion, VFW, talk to those commanders of those halls, because I'm sure we all fall on different spectrums. Left, right, Republican, Democrat, Independent. But if you're for a veteran, there's no way possible you can condone how Gregory Edwards' life ended in that cell alone, probably calling for his family. And I don't know, we just need to do something different. We need to be aggressive, pull the necessary levers of the government that we can. and hit those necessary voting blocks. But that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get with the halls, the local halls in my area in Brevard County, and try to make something happen from there. You know, because once you see it, if you watch Sheriff Ivey's video, you'll think everything was justified. If you listen to what Sheriff Ivey said, everything was justified. But it's not until you watch the full video, unedited, that you realize that that young man should have still been here with his family and still fishing. That's all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. I really appreciate your strength in telling in you know, you, Denise, Dana, in recalling this and sharing this. So I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you holding this
Thank you
space
so much.
and being here.
Next,
Yeah.
we are going to hear from Jessica. As was mentioned before, Jessica was instrumental, or the linchpin in making sure that this video was released. And I understand that this has been a long time. I believe the advocacy for this video to be released has been going on for a long time. So Jessica, I'm glad that you're going to be here. And really the video was just released in November of this year, almost 2 years after. So without further ado, the floor is yours. Jessica, thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me and involving me in this conversation. That is true. A week from today, it will be 2 years since combat medic Gregory Edwards was arrested and had force used against him and was left alone in cell 9, became unconscious, never gained consciousness again, and died the next day. And so actually, this has been a very powerful conversation for me, and thank you for involving me, because I obviously come from a different place than people that actually knew Gregory Edwards. And so this is the first time that I've actually been able to hear their stories after watching the video that we fought so hard to get released. So this has been very powerful, sad, but in a way inspirational that so many people care and want to see things change, because that is ultimately the goal of releasing the video. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I am not a veteran. My grandfather fought in the Battle of the Bulge and froze his feet there, and my father was in Vietnam and was the only person on his river patrol boat to survive when it hit a mine. I had a first marriage that didn't survive Desert Storm. Certainly there was some effect there. So I have some insight, but all of the comments and involving me in this has certainly opened my eyes. And it's somewhat satisfying for me as an attorney, because I am an advocate. I've been an attorney since 1999, 21 years now. And so have long fought for justice, and my eyes have been open to basically all the injustices of our so-called justice system and how it affects people who are disadvantaged. And this case has further opened my eyes. So thank you for involving me. I just want to tell you that really my involvement in this case, and I was one of 2 attorneys. Ed Burke was the other attorney who represented Florida today in their quest to get this video released from the sheriff. And Ed Burke is an attorney in Jacksonville, and I'm in Brevard County, where the lawsuit was brought and where Sheriff Ivey was refusing to release the video. And Mr. Burke is a media attorney. I am mostly a criminal defense attorney, doing some other things, but have a lot of trial experience. And he brought me in just kind of as the local attorney that knew the system and knew the players to kind of fight for this. We had a pretty good judge. Judge Dugan made some really good rulings in this case. There was some political posturing in the case, and the sheriff was able to delay the ruling or any resolution until after the recent election. We fought against that. We were ready for trial despite some reporting otherwise. They delayed the case. They were successful in getting a continuance. And then after they got the continuance, after Sheriff Ivey won the election, then we began some settlement negotiations. I think once they realized basically what this trial was going to do to Sheriff Ivey, even though he had won, they then started posturing that they would settle, and through some pretty rigorous negotiations, we were able to finally get an agreement that the video would be released. That case, the case that I was involved in, is going to be different than the case that Kathleen Edwards, the wife of Gregory Edwards, hopefully will be bringing soon. She has different attorneys. She has Mr. Crump on that case, and hopefully they will be filing a civil rights lawsuit soon. And I say that soon because the statute of limitations is coming up in a week if they pursue under a wrongful death type strategy. There's other strategies that they could pursue. But anyway, she has another attorney on that. So the case that I was involved in was not necessarily about what the sheriff's degree of responsibility was and how Gregory Edwards was treated. It was more about a public records type lawsuit in which Florida today had requested what they thought was considered to be a public record, that being the video. And the sheriff was refusing to release it, saying that he was not authorized to release that under the law because it reflected or would depict security concerns, in other words, the interior of the jail. I know as a local attorney that claim is, excuse my legal word here, BS, because I had seen several videos out of the jail with no redactions whatsoever. And also the sheriff had put out all sorts of promotional videos. He loves to put himself out on YouTube. He had done an Eye of the Tiger lip syncing that was set in the booking area that depicted all sorts of so-called security concerns. He had allowed some British TV show to come in and film a show called Locked Up Teens. Anyway, his claim that there was security concerns was laughable, honestly. But in the long run, we were able to buzz out some of the so-called security concerns and reach the agreement and the settlement. So the lawsuit that I was involved in was a little bit different than what we most might normally think about. The other kind of lawsuit or legal action that could have been involved in this case was whether or not criminal charges should have been filed. And it's important to know, at least in this case, that the sheriff does not allow typically external investigations. In other words, this is a case set in Florida, Brevard County, Florida. The sheriff has the ability to police himself or investigate himself, or as most departments do, they allow an outside agency to come in and do the investigation so it looks more transparent. That is something that Sheriff Ivey chooses not to do. In other words, he could have had the Florida Department of Law Enforcement come in and do the investigation on this case, and he didn't. Instead, he had his own investigators come in and do an investigation. And of course, they found that nothing was wrong. And of course, based on their own investigation, they, in exonerating themselves, they also demonized Gregory Edwards' wife, Kathleen Edwards. They went out, as Dana mentioned earlier, and interviewed her the night of. She knew that her husband was having a PTSD incident and thought that he was going to get help. And when the investigators showed up very late at night, well after the incident had happened, they did not tell her how bad her husband was. And I know this because the interview is recorded. And so I've heard the interview. So they don't tell her that he's been tased or maced or put in a restraint chair improperly, left with a spit hood on, and left with the prongs in his back. They tell him he's had a medical incident, and they start asking her, why do you think he could have had this medical incident beyond obviously his anxiety and PTSD? And she speculates that he could have been huffing because there was some indust cans in the trash, and she showed that to them. So Sheriff Ivey then picked up on this and told everyone in Brevard County that Gregory Edwards had been on drugs. He was a violent man that fought for 2 hours, that he tried to punch the officer and attack the officer. And in one interview, I think Sheriff Ivey even told the public that Gregory Edwards attempted to murder the deputy that he initially had an altercation with. And the sad thing is about this case, we would have never known whether those things that Sheriff Ivey has put out in the public are true or not, unless Florida Today had brought their lawsuit and got this video. Because when we got the video, we found that his version was greatly exaggerated at best, flat out lies at worst. So, of course, Sheriff Ivey, they did their own investigation, they exonerated themselves, they then turned over their investigation to the local state attorney's office, and the local state attorney, Phil Archer, wrote a letter finding that criminal charges for the officers were not warranted, and in fact commended them on how they treated Gregory Edwards after the use of force, which I think is very telling, because now that we have the video and we can see actually what happened, we can see that the way that they treated Gregory Edwards after the fact was, as someone indicated, akin to torture. So why Phil Archer would have ever commended them on that, I don't know. So Sheriff Ivey had his exoneration of his own investigation. He had the rubber stamp of the state attorney's office. He then made some gesture to have the FDLE come in and do an overview of his own investigation. And of course, they found that nothing was wrong. They didn't do their own investigation. They just reviewed the investigation that he did. They didn't interview anyone, anything to that effect. It's interesting to know that there are some ties between Sheriff Ivey and the FDLE. So Brevard County has its own little special set of problems, I think, that we would have never known about had it not been for Florida Today bringing this lawsuit. And we wouldn't have known how to, or to what extreme Sheriff Ivey was demonizing Gregory Edwards and Kathleen Edwards and making them out to be the evil people that he wants everyone to believe they are, when in fact we can now see the truth of the matter. So this case has a special intersection of, not only local politics that I was just speaking to, how veterans are treated in this county and obviously in other locations, how PTSD is often mishandled, and also just mental health issues in general. And I think that it is especially bad or dangerous or of a concern for people of color. I have to tell you, if Gregory Edwards had been white, I wonder if he would have been demonized as much as Sheriff Ivey did. I wonder if, because Sheriff Ivey's base and followers continued the demonizing, I wonder if people would have drank his Kool-Aid, so to speak, to the degree that they did, had Gregory Edwards been white and Kathleen Edwards had been a 9-month pregnant white woman. I think we would have sadly heard another story coming out of the sheriff's department and some of his followers. So there are several things here, I guess. I do encourage people to watch the whole video unless it's going to trigger you, because I totally understand how it could be a trigger. I mean, when I first got the video, I was the first person to probably see the video in Brevard County outside of law enforcement. It was extremely powerful to me. I can't even imagine if I had served and was a veteran. Someone just pointed out that, Jessica, you should talk about Ivey's visit to Kathleen Edwards' house, and that's true. I did miss that. I think one of the other telling factors in the scenario is that supposedly Sheriff Ivey showed up, and Dina could speak to this a little bit more, I think, but Sheriff Ivey showed up at Kathleen Edwards' house to do a so-called wellness check on her and hugged her and talked to her in the middle of the night without her lawyers being present. She lives in the south of the county. He lives in the north of the county. He took the time to drive down and do a wellness check on her for something that supposedly a post that she'd done on social media 3 days prior in the middle of the night, surrounded by numerous officers. So there's a lot of factors going on in Brevard County. But when getting back to the video, there's things that I noticed that I guess I just wanted to point out. Some of this has been spoken to already by Dina, who did the timeline. That was very succinct. The thing that I'm looking at as an attorney is I'm looking at the use of force and the degree of force. And I will tell you that Florida Today did get an expert, and he's a law enforcement officer expert, and he found that the use of force in subduing Gregory Edwards was not excessive. I think that's something that the federal court is going to have to decide once Mrs. Edwards files her suit. There are a lot of officers. There are, I think, 6 taser. The tasers used 6 times in like 90 seconds. When he is pulled up off the floor, I see him looking like a sack of potatoes, like he's unconscious at that point, and that he comes to later. It's important to note that in the police reports, they characterize Gregory Edwards as continuing to fight constantly, even when they're putting him in the chair, and even when he is put in cell 9, the second cell that he's in when he's in the chair. I see somebody who probably has taser probes still on their back end, and that is being sat in and strapped down on them. I don't see him fighting to that extent. You also note that they put the spit hood on him. There's been a lot of speculation that he was actively spitting on people. The own officers and the reports indicate that he was not spitting on people. It is important to note in the police reports, at no time does anybody ever mention that those taser probes were left in his back end. To me, as a lawyer, that is the greatest thing that is indicative of their intent. Unfortunately, there is no audio on the system. So that's not something that was intentionally omitted. There's no audio on the system. It's just a surveillance system without audio. You will see that when they pick him off the floor and he's kind of a sack of potatoes, seems to be unconscious. They put him in the chair. He's strapped in. He looks like he kind of starts to come to because you see his legs move a little bit at that point. And then they all stand around him after they put the spit hood on him before they put him in the cell. And there's one officer in particular that seems to be giving him a lecture. I often wonder what that lecture was. I would speculate that it was a lecture about how you're going to sit in a cell now, strapped in this chair with a spit hood on your mask and on your face, and we're not going to decontaminate you, and we're going to leave these probes in your back end and let you think about what you just did. Because that's the only thing to me that would explain why nobody, not the nurse, not any of the officers, followed policy in this case. Under policy, they're supposed to have a medical check after somebody's put in the restraint chair. Under policy, they're supposed to decontaminate someone, obviously, when they've been sprayed in the face with OC spray. At the time, there was no spit hood policy regarding when they couldn't put that on. The sheriff has since changed their policy and said no spit hoods after somebody's been, sprayed in the face or put in a restraint chair, but that wasn't the policy at the time. So they didn't do medical checks. They didn't do strap checks on the chair like they're supposed to under their policy. They didn't remove the probes. That was omitted from any reports whatsoever. They didn't decontaminate. Someone's lecturing him before he's put in there. I think that they were punishing him for acting out, which is not what they should do to anyone, certainly not to someone who they should suspect is experiencing PTSD. So, those are the things that I would look at how he was treated when he was lifted off the floor, look to see whether he's aware, look to verify that he's not actively spitting on anyone. And then someone called it a peep show, if that. I mean, there's a couple walk-bys. They do look at him like he's an animal in a cage one time. I think one time the nurse and another deputy does. And he's obviously in distress, and no one does a darn thing. Someone finally points it out. They open the cell. What is their first concern? Oh, we better get these taser probes out of his back end, and they start wrapping up the wires. You'll see that somebody starts wrapping up the wires. Those are the wires that are off of the taser probe that's still in his back end, because they cut those to wheel him into cell 9. So that's their first concern. Not giving him medical attention, that's not their first concern. They appear to be laughing and standing around and looking at him. To me, that indicates intent. So be forewarned. That is very powerful, and it is certainly a trigger. So those are the things that I would look at. I'll try to go a little bit quicker here. Yes, someone pointed out that the supervisor did have the spit hood thrown away. It was not preserved as part of the evidence. There's some other questions that I have as a lawyer that I think are only going to be answered when the federal case is filed, that have not really been talked about in the press too much. I want to know about the connections between Ivey and the FDLE. I want to know why I have seen photographs of Gregory Edwards at the hospital, and he has some sort of black substance all on the side of his face. What is that substance? Did that come out of his lungs? Did that come out of his respiratory system? I want to know why there's blood coming out of his urethra or his penis at the hospital, and none of those things are mentioned in the autopsy report. The autopsy said he died of excited delirium. Excited delirium is highly contested. As a criminal defense attorney, I think it's often used as an excuse when someone dies in police custody. But there are a line of scientists that believe that it is a real thing. Excuse me, and it's often found in people who have used stimulants or narcotics, and their system gets basically overloaded. I'm not going to get too technical here. I don't know if I could if I wanted to, but your system gets overloaded. You have too much adrenaline, your system can't regulate it, and you can have a heart attack. It's important to note here, though, that, the sheriff tried to say Gregory Edwards was on drugs, and therefore he had excited delirium, and he had super strength, and he was a very violent person. The problem is that the drug that he's supposedly relying on, even if it was true, is the huffing, and huffing is a depressant, not a stimulant. So the other thing to know is that the only way that you can diagnose excited delirium is to look at slides of the brain at a lab that's specialized to look for signs of excited delirium, and that wasn't done here. And by the way, the brain is one of the organs that's not been returned to the family, and also one of the kidneys is missing, is not returned to the family. And guess what would cause someone to bleed from the penis? A kidney injury. How would you get a kidney injury? From excessive force. I don't know. These are all things that I want to know as a lawyer. So I might be getting too far into it, but I know that there's a lot of people that are very interested in this case and are following it. And so those are the things that I would look for. Really, what can we do going forward? I think there's been several good ideas. The problem is the gap. We have Veterans Court, we have the VA, but we don't have really good systems in place for when that initial police contact is made. Really, there should be a mental health professional that is responding either with the EMTs or the police. It is a lot to ask of police to simultaneously take care of someone's mental health, but also enforce the law. But they need to have basic training. And here there were training and policies, I guess, by the responding officers, but they weren't all followed. So we need to make sure there's policies in place, training in place, and that those are actually being followed. So we need to figure out something about that gap. We need to do that. I don't know exactly what the answer is. I commend everybody for getting involved and following through. Someone asked, do we have any idea where the organs are? No, I don't. Hopefully they can find those in the federal lawsuit. We really need to rethink. My undergrad is in psychology. And I always have an interest in psychology and the law. we really need to think mental health over in this country. It's a huge undertaking, but I commend the show for bringing awareness and encouraging people to, awareness begets awareness begets awareness, and involvement, begets change. So I commend the show. I thank you for involving me. If you have any specific questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Jessica, I want to jump in and thank you for bringing that to the fore, that we need mental health and that the importance of defunding the police. You see that poster back there we made. I made that with my sons. Is that by defunding the police, we are funding all the other social services that are being neglected because of overfunded police forces and overfunded militaries, the overfunded standing military that we have. So I really thank you for bringing that and sharing all the details. Natasha, I want to hear from you.
No, this has been great. Jessica, I heard you say that the something about the timeline is, and I don't want to speak to where things might be, but did I hear you say that the timeline to get this potential accountability through a lawsuit is winding down?
So I am not on that case,
Yeah.
But my understanding as a lawyer is that there's 2 years to bring a wrongful death lawsuit. However, if it's brought under a negligence theory, there's 4 years. So it kind of depends on the family's lawyer, what theory they're pursuing. If it's a civil rights violation under a negligence, they have 4 years. But if it's wrongful death, then it's 2. And they might decide not to go with a wrongful death lawsuit because it might be harder to prove that what they did caused the death. I think it might be easier for them to prove that what they didn't do didn't prevent the death. Because I do certainly think that Gregory Edwards would be alive today had they just followed their own policies. And they did not do that. No matter what you think his cause of death is, let's assume that it is excited delirium, and that he was going to have a medical incident no matter what happened. They could have prevented that if they had just followed their policies to do the medical checks, and they did not do that. So that might be the easiest theory for them to prove, rather than showing that the use of force actually caused the death, which would be more of a wrongful death theory. It's a little complicated.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And so in terms of, I want to bring other folks in. This has been a really great conversation to have all of you join us. So I'm curious, what's next in Brevard County? Listen, as an Air Force veteran, I think I've shared with you all that I've been there to Melbourne, out at Coco at Patrick Air Force Base. It's a sleepy town in some ways. It does have the appearance of a safe place, but I see that you all have been in the streets and have been demanding justice. So now that the video is out, I know that was the big push in the area. Now that the video is out, what are some of the next steps that you all are advocating for? Dana, Denise, and then Brent, if you'd like to share.
The group that's out there, they've been doing a lot more on the streets than I have. I've been kind of just taking care of some personal stuff for Miss Edwards, but they've been out on the street protesting. I think they've done at least 30 events since June. And with all this 2-year mark coming up, we kind of got a little bit of thrust with the George Floyd case, and that's kind of helped us because we went silent for a while. So that's kind of where we've been sparking. We've done some press conferences. They're doing the protesting continuously. I believe they're hosting a vigil next week. I'll have to get more information on that. I believe it's going to be on the 10th. So I'll get with the folks running that and we'll let you know. But really, we're just kind of wondering what's what the next step is as far as her lawyers go. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what those next steps are. But we keep, the video was the biggest piece, and, that protester group was out there, and plus Florida Today was out, wanting the video to be released. I mean, all we can do is just keep hoping that, we get some limelight here. What I'm looking for is, some more national attention so we can get this case out there so that we can hold, Brevard County Sheriff's Office and Sheriff Ivey accountable. He's not very transparent, so we have our own little issues here in Brevard as far as that goes. So we really just want to be able to push this further nationally and get recognized for this case, because we need advocacy for veterans and PTSD and mental health reform. And we're not going to get it. It seems to be dwindling down here. And we just got to find that one person, that one group that kind of gets us over that hump to push it a lot further. Thank you.
Thank you. Either Denise or Brent. I'm thinking about any final thoughts that you might have. I know that, I'll take a pause. Any final thoughts that you all would like to share? And then I want to talk quickly about the whitehouse.gov petition that we have as a particular call to action.
Like I said during my my statement, I think for me that we get the local veterans organizations, American Legion, VFW. We need to tell, because that's a huge voting block, and so, and because I am, like I said earlier, American Legion member, so I think it's important though, and if we turn around and get these people to start acknowledging what actually took place, because if they've only watched what Sheriff Ivey presented, then they think everything was justifiable. But if I could turn around and get these different organizations to host watch parties, and that's what I'm going to attempt to do, and I think we may be able to see some change, because we all understand this is political. So I know early in the game, because you hadn't heard anything from our local elected representatives. They're talking about everything else, but the one thing that they haven't talked about is one of the biggest things that have gone on in Brevard County in 2018 is Gregory Edwards. And as a matter of fact, the local representative for Brevard County, I was on his webpage some months ago, and I was challenging him about, hey, where are you at? Where are you at? And of course, and I started uploading Florida Today issues, some of the information that they had freedom of information requested to his website, and I never got a response. Never got a response. Eventually, I got kicked off. Then I said, hold on a minute now. You're an elected official, so you have to have you have to maintain a public dialogue here, a public forum. So they accepted me, they allowed me to come back in. And so I kept at it and I kept at it. And of course, then they just shut the site down altogether. So I think, once again, the VFW, the American Legion, is the way I'm going to approach it. And if these organizations that are full of veterans really believe what they say they believe, I'm going to call them on it, and we'll see how that falls.
Thank you. As I listened to you speak, I thought about Brevard County was again recently in the news with the two teenagers. I think AJ and I forget their nicknames, but there are two teenagers who there's a bit of discourse around what happened with that loss of life. Is this the same sheriff's office?
Yeah, sure is.
Yeah. So, here we have, another example of these things are not isolated. And so, when we fail Gregory Edwards in 2018 and there's no justice, it's almost as if the system is emboldened to then go out and do almost 2 years later and to take two teenagers who were authorized to be in that vehicle. As I understand it, it wasn't a stolen vehicle, and the shots that were fired into that car does not align with the officer's original story. And so again, we talk about justice, but even if it's not you and your family, when we get justice for Gregory, when we get justice for these teens, we have a safer county, and this isn't isolated to your city as well. I know we're pressed up against time, but again, this was a great conversation with you all, and I really Jessica, I saw you came off mute for a moment. Did you have like a final comment in terms of that recent incident?
I would just say that there's a pattern in Brevard County of demonizing anyone who might have been hurt by the sheriff's department, who speaks out against the sheriff's department. There is a very special atmosphere in this county in which people do tend to circle the wagons and drink the Kool-Aid. And so we have a problem locally, honestly. But it is reflective of a larger problem that we need to address. And I think it's just a very good example. So if this case can draw some national attention, it will help us locally, but also speak to the larger issue at hand.
And so, yes, thank you. Just my final, kind of thought is really, we talked about, what was the call to action? We feel a duty to support this family. Like we mentioned, Gregory's, spouse, widow, is a Air Force veteran, combat veteran herself, who has deployed and is grieving the loss of her spouse, and has had a rough time ever since this happened. So when we talk about, it doesn't just happen to the person who was in cell 9 and who lost his life in that hospital room. Grief and PTSD is devastating and compounded on just her experience. And so we wrap our arms around her. If we know that this is, the holidays, if people can give, there is a GoFundMe that is out there to support. Any amount that you can give is appreciated. So I'm going to drop this GoFundMe in the chat. And again, this would be strictly and goes directly to Kathleen, Mrs. Kathleen Edwards, the widow of Gregory Edwards, to just, just a thoughtful token, if you can do so, would be appreciated. As her and her child are approaching the holidays and the anniversary of the loss of her husband's life. So I just really want to thank everyone again for joining us today. We will continue to advocate, but one of the things that we talked about is how do we move in a way that is galvanizing and organizing. So I know today, the advocates, you all created a White House .org petition, which essentially begins today and can be signed for the next 30 days. But here's the thing. We need 100,000 signatures in the next 30 days in order for this to be acknowledged. And then once it's acknowledged, once we've hit that threshold of 100,000 signatures in the next 30 days, the incoming presidential administration will be in office. After that, there's a 60-day period that the family and the public should be able to expect a response. So the call to action here is to, I'm dropping this petition in the chat. Really want you to click on that link, sign that link and support it. I want you to share it in every space. If you're a veteran, share it with all of your friends. Share it on Signal, share it on WhatsApp, share it on all mediums, so that we can get to that 100,000 signature threshold. Again, what that does is put it in the lap of the incoming administration, and the hope is to get a full investigation of Brevard County, Florida, Sheriff's Office, to get justice for Gregory and what happened, a return of his organs so that his family can at least feel closure in terms of his desire, which was to be, of course, buried whole. And so the call to action again is to share that petition in all of the spaces. Let's get it to that threshold. And we'll continue to share it in the next weeks that we're on live in our own medium, and we hope that you do the same. And so, Miles, do you have any kind of closing thoughts? Thank you again, everyone. Dana, Denise, Brent, Jessica, this was amazing. Please let us know how we can continue to support you. If there are any significant movement and you all need to get on, you have our contact. We can make room and have you all back on.
Thank you.
I thought, thank you. My thoughts are, if I have to explain why I fly this flag upside down, or why I might wear this as a bandage around my mouth because I'm not allowed to speak after a conversation like this, then people don't understand what's going on in the world. You know, I asked the family before we came on, because I know this is a sensitive topic, and I know we're speaking to veterans and people who've been in the military for their entire career, who retired. So I asked the friends, I asked the representatives here if I was going to trigger anybody, and none of them were triggered. And I know people are often triggered by this, by flying the flag like this, which is actually the right way because of the distress that our country is in at the time. And I receive hate mail just on this show, and we're grassroots. You know what I'm saying? We're not even like a huge platform. So that the divide in this country is real, and this platform is about creating the conversations that will heal this divide, that will heal our country and allow us to move forward so our children can have a peaceful future. So that's all I got to say.
Thank you, Miles.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And so as we prepare to end here, we've been on and we're on for a little bit longer today. I really think we had a full conversation, so I think it's okay. So this is a moment that I just want to, just really just step back a moment. And we've talked about Gregory no longer being with us. And I think that this is a moment to really just as we go out to close, just talk a little bit about Gregory and who he was as a person. And I'll share this link as well. But when we talk about a combat medic, those in the Army, they know that is a 68 whiskey, one who will administer emergency medical care in the field, both in combat and humanitarian situations. You'll serve as the first responder and triage illnesses and injuries to save lives. You'll also train other soldiers in lifesaver and first responder courses. So that is, who Gregory was as a soldier. And I want to briefly speak on words that were shared from his wife, Kathleen. And it says, "My husband saved people's lives. He was a good human being. He sacrificed his life, his mental health, to do something for his country. A sentimental outpouring for Gregory Lloyd Edwards' widow, Kathleen. This is how he's treated. The least the sheriff could do, if he was a patriot, is request an independent investigation. Gregory was a Christian husband, father, and friend, always volunteering his time, helping strangers on the side of the road. He never gossiped or judged people. Greg would give a stranger his last meal. He grew up in East Orange, New Jersey. He loved sports. His favorite football team was the Jets. He loved working out at the local LA Fitness. His favorite color was army green, just like his wife, a suitable shade considering their devoted service in the Army. In addition to sharing a favorite color and time in service, Gregory and his wife also enjoy recreational activities such as fishing and camping. And really, the majority of Greg's life was spent in service of this country, deployed at times in both Iraq and Kosovo. He and his wife, Kathleen, they met at a VA hospital in West Virginia. Since they both suffer from PTS associated with their time in service, Kathleen said they hoped Brevard County would bring peace, sanity, and tranquility. And so we are hoping that you will join us in a moment of silence in honor of U.S. Army veteran Gregory Edwards. Have a good evening and thank you for joining us.